So Donald Trump called out Canada this morning, publicly, personally, and aggressively. A series of social media attacks and an unscripted press gaggle in which he accused Mark Carney of being ungrateful, threatened the most severe economic measures ever imposed on a so-called ally, and essentially dared Canada to respond. Mark Carney responded within hours, not with words, with actions. A devastating three-layer counterstrike, a public dismantling of Trump's claims with hard data, an immediate set of economic measures targeting Trump's political base, and a coordinated endorsement from 5 allied nations that landed within 90 minutes of Carney's address. By the time Wall Street closed, the markets had delivered their verdict. Carney won. And it wasn't close. But the real story isn't the policies or the market reaction. The real story is what this exchange revealed about the two leaders. One came with insults. The other came with a plan. One improvised at a press gaggle. The other deployed a preloaded response package that had been wargamed, coordinated with allies, and calibrated to inflict maximum political damage at minimum economic cost. This wasn't a fair fight. This was impulse versus preparation, and preparation won in straight sets. Warren Buffett's assessment of this exchange was the most pointed commentary he has made on leadership in the entire trade conflict. What he said about the difference between leaders who react and leaders who anticipate, and what that difference costs a country, is something every voter needs to hear. Subscribe now, because this story changes how you understand this entire conflict. Here's how the day unfolded. And I want to walk through this almost hour by hour, because the timeline is what reveals the mismatch. At 6:30 this morning, a pre-recorded interview with Mark Carney aired on Canadian morning television, with segments picked up by American networks within the hour. In the interview, Carney calmly discussed Canada's trade diversification progress, the new bilateral agreements with the EU and Indo-Pacific nations, the energy export infrastructure being built toward Atlantic and Pacific terminals, the allied partnerships that have reshaped Canada's economic architecture in under 2 years. It was measured, data-driven, and deliberately understated. The kind of interview that in normal times would get a brief mention on American business channels and nothing more. But one line cut through all of it. Carney said, "Canada's economic future is no longer hostage to the decisions of any single trading partner. We have built a resilient, diversified, sovereign economy, and we did it in less than 2 years. Hostage. Single trading partner." He said the quiet part out loud. Canada doesn't need America anymore. And Donald Trump heard it. According to White House sources, Trump was watching Fox Business in the residence when the segment aired. He reportedly turned to an aide and said, "Did you hear what this guy just said about us?" The aide hadn't seen it. It didn't matter. Trump had already reached for his phone. By 7:15 a.m., Trump was posting. 6 posts in 45 minutes. The first called Carney the most ungrateful leader of any country, and claimed Canada would be nothing without America. The second accused Canada of ripping off the United States for decades, and said Carney was going on television to brag about it. The third threatened the most severe economic measures ever imposed on a so-called ally. Posts 4 through 6 got personal, attacking Carney's Goldman Sachs background, calling him a globalist, questioning whether he was even really Canadian because of his years running the Bank of England, and claiming Canada's economy was a disaster that only survives because America lets it. 6 posts in 45 minutes, each one angrier than the last, each one less coherent than the one before it, and each one backing the president further into a corner. Because every public threat demands a follow-through, and none of these threats had been vetted, analyzed, or coordinated with the people who would need to execute them. His own National Economic Council director reportedly learned about the post from a CNN push notification on his phone. The Secretary of Commerce found out when a reporter called asking for comment. The trade team was blindsided. Nobody in the entire apparatus of American economic governance knew this was coming, because there was nothing to know. It was pure impulse. A man with a phone and a grievance, posting before his own government was awake. Then came the press gaggle. At 8 a.m., Trump stopped on the White House South Lawn before departing for an event and amplified everything he'd posted on live television to cameras broadcasting to every newsroom on the planet. He went further than the posts. He announced 3 specific economic measures, potential banking restrictions on Canadian financial institutions operating in the United States, an immediate freeze on Canadian energy imports, and possible initiation of USMCA withdrawal proceedings. 3 specific threats, made on live television, none of them discussed with the economic team beforehand, none of them reviewed by the trade policy staff, none of them assessed for legal feasibility, market impact, or unintended consequences. One of his senior economic advisors was visible in the background, reportedly on the phone within seconds, trying to assess whether the president's unscripted commitments were even legally possible. Another advisor was seen with their head in their hands. The Canadian response was already being prepared before Trump finished talking, and here's the trap he built for himself without realizing it. By making specific threats publicly and on camera, Trump committed himself. Walking them back would mean looking weak, and Trump never walks anything back. Following through would mean implementing policies that his own team hadn't evaluated, and that, as Carney would soon demonstrate with devastating precision, would hurt America far more than they would hurt Canada. He'd created a lose-lose situation for himself before 9 in the morning, and the other side hadn't even spoken yet. So that was the call-out. Personal, aggressive, uncoordinated, made on impulse, after seeing a television interview at 6:30 in the morning, containing specific threats that the president's own economic team learned about by watching the news. 3 threats that backed the president into a corner he couldn't escape without either hurting his own country or humiliating himself. All delivered before most of Washington had finished their first cup of coffee. Markets opened at 9:30 a.m. nervous and volatile. Energy stocks swung wildly. The Canadian dollar dipped initially as traders priced in the uncertainty, which is what uncertainty does. It creates fear, and fear creates selling. Trump allies pointed to the market reaction as proof that the call-out was working. See, Canada's currency is dropping, they're scared. But experienced traders knew better. They were waiting for the other side's response. Because in any confrontation, the opening move tells you about aggression. The counter move tells you about strategy. And strategy is what markets actually price. The question for the next 4.5 hours was, how would Carney respond? Would he match aggression with aggression? Would he escalate? Would he back down? Would he try to de-escalate through diplomatic channels? The answer, when it came, revealed something that changes how we should understand this entire trade conflict. For 4.5 hours after Trump's call-out, Mark Carney said nothing. Absolutely nothing. No public statement. No social media response. No spokesperson briefing. No background calls to reporters. Total, complete silence. Media speculated endlessly. Pundits debated whether Carney was caught off guard. Trump allies celebrated on every available platform. Fox News ran a chyron that read, "Canada silent after Trump ultimatum." Conservative commentators declared premature victory. He's afraid to respond. Canada knows it's outmatched. Carney is hiding. One Trump ally went on cable news and said, "This is what happens when a drama teacher's replacement tries to play hardball with the leader of the free world." The confidence was total, the misreading was catastrophic, because the silence wasn't hesitation. It was staging. Behind the scenes, Carney's team wasn't deliberating what to do. They were activating what they'd already built. The response package had been prepared weeks earlier, one of several preloaded counterstrike protocols designed and wargamed for exactly this kind of provocation. Carney's strategic team had identified 6 likely Trump escalation scenarios during planning sessions the previous month. Scenario 3 was labeled Public Personal Attack, Economic Threats, Uncoordinated. Today was Scenario 3. The playbook was already written. The countermeasures were already drafted. The allied statements were already pre-approved. The 4.5 hours were used for 3 things only. Final coordination calls with allied leaders to confirm their pre-approved statements were ready for release on signal. Verification that the economic countermeasures were legally activated and operationally ready to execute, and timing calibration, because the response was designed to land at 12:30 p.m., after the market had fully priced in the fear and uncertainty from Trump's threats, but before the trading day ended, maximizing the market impact of the counterstrike when it reversed the narrative. Even the timing was strategic. Even the silence was a weapon. At 12:30 p.m., Carney delivered a 15-minute address from the floor of Parliament. Calm, measured, data-heavy, every sentence sourced, every claim verified, the opposite of Trump's morning in every conceivable dimension. He dismantled each of Trump's 3 threats with specific, sourced, independently verified economic data, and he did it without raising his voice once. On banking restrictions, Carney noted that Canadian financial institutions hold $2.4 trillion in global assets and process over $600 billion in cross-border transactions annually. He explained, with the patience of a professor addressing a struggling student, that Canadian banks aren't peripheral to American finance, they're embedded in it. Restricting them wouldn't punish Canada. It would trigger cascading disruptions in American lending markets, mortgage processing, and cross-border commercial transactions that American businesses depend on every single day. He said, "We welcome the president to consult his own banking regulators before making promises his system cannot survive." On the energy import freeze, Carney pointed out that the United States imports 60% of its crude oil from Canada, not 20%, not 30, 60. An import freeze would raise American gas prices by an estimated $1.40 per gallon within 30 days. He cited three independent energy analysts by name from Goldman Sachs, the IEA, and Wood Mackenzie, giving the number the weight of consensus rather than partisan argument. He said, "We encourage the president to explain that arithmetic to American consumers filling up their tanks. Perhaps he can do it at one of his gas station photo opportunities." On USMCA withdrawal, Carney's legal team had pre-prepared a constitutional analysis showing that withdrawal requires 6 months' notice and direct congressional involvement under Article 34.6 of the agreement. The president cannot withdraw by executive order, by press conference, or by social media post. Carney said, "We suggest the president consult the agreement he signed. It is quite clear on this point. We are happy to send him a copy if he has misplaced his." Each rebuttal was calm, specific, and devastating. Carney didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult Trump personally. He didn't match aggression with aggression. He used numbers, and numbers in a trade war are more devastating than adjectives. Simultaneously with the address, Canada activated targeted economic countermeasures, not broad retaliatory tariffs. Those are blunt instruments that hurt everyone, including the country imposing them. These were surgical, precise, designed with the cold precision of a central banker who spent his career understanding exactly where the pressure points are in a financial system. First, immediate suspension of potash export facilitation to 6 American agricultural states: Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Indiana, Missouri, Ohio. Canada supplies approximately 30% of the world's potash, the essential fertilizer without which American crops cannot grow. Without potash, corn yields drop by 30 to 40%. Soybeans become economically unviable. The timing was deliberate, pre-planting season, when farmers are placing their fertilizer orders for the year. The states were deliberate, agricultural heartland states with Republican senators who would feel the pressure immediately, whose phone lines would light up within hours, whose constituents would be standing in farm supply stores staring at empty shelves and asking very pointed questions about the trade war they'd been told was being won. Second, formal notice to 3 major pipeline operators that capacity allocation reviews would prioritize Pacific and Atlantic export commitments over U.S.-bound flows. This wasn't a dramatic announcement, it was paperwork. The kind of quiet operational signal that energy markets read instantly and price accordingly. American refineries dependent on Canadian heavy crude, and there are dozens of them concentrated in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, faced immediate uncertainty about medium-term supply. The action didn't cut off oil. It did something more strategically elegant. It forced American energy companies to factor in supply uncertainty, which raises costs, which raises consumer prices, which creates political pressure. Third, Canadian pension funds and institutional investors received official guidance to accelerate what Ottawa calls sovereign risk diversification, the polite bureaucratic term for pulling Canadian capital out of American markets and redirecting it elsewhere. Over $400 billion in stable long-term institutional capital that American bond markets and equity markets depend on for liquidity and stability, now being actively redirected toward European, Asian, and Commonwealth markets. The capital doesn't leave overnight, but the signal does, and markets respond to signals. Carney didn't retaliate broadly, he retaliated precisely. Every measure targeted a constituency that Trump needs politically. Every measure created pain in districts that vote Republican. Every measure was designed not to punish Canada's opponent, but to make Canada's opponent's voters demand that their own leaders fix the problem. That's the difference between retaliation and strategy. Retaliation is anger. Strategy is making the other side's people do your work for you. And then came the coalition. This is the part that reveals the full depth of what Carney had built. Within 90 minutes of Carney's address, 5 Allied leaders issued coordinated public statements. The United Kingdom noted that Canada's measured response stands in stark contrast to the provocative language from Washington. Japan reaffirmed binding commitments with Canada and expressed concern about unilateral economic threats between allied nations. The European Union invoked the principle that trade disputes should be resolved through dialogue and established mechanisms, not public threats and social media ultimatums. Australia reaffirmed its strategic partnership with Canada and commitment to rules-based international trade. South Korea expressed serious concern about unprovoked economic threats against allied nations and reiterated its own trade agreements with Ottawa. 5 allied nations, 5 statements, 90 minutes. Every single one critical of the United States, supportive of Canada. That kind of coordination does not happen in real time. It does not happen spontaneously. You cannot get 5 heads of state to agree on lunch in 90 minutes, let alone issue precisely worded diplomatic statements. This happens when Carney's team had called those leaders before Trump's call-out, days or weeks before, and said, when this happens, and it will happen, here's what we need from you. Here's your pre-approved language. Here's the timeline. Wait for our signal. And when the signal came at 12:30 p.m., 5 governments were ready. The call-out that was supposed to isolate Canada instead isolated America. Trump tried to make Canada look weak by calling them out publicly. Within hours, 5 nations had publicly sided with Canada against the United States. The diplomatic math was devastating. 1 nation standing alone, shouting, 6 nations standing together, speaking calmly. Trump thought he was starting a fight. He was walking into an ambush. Carney had been waiting for this call-out, had built the response, coordinated the allies, loaded the countermeasures, set the timing. The only thing he needed from Trump was the trigger. And Trump, right on schedule, provided it at 7:15 a.m. with a phone and a grievance. And once you understand that Carney was waiting, that every element of the counterstrike was pre-built and ready for deployment, the entire exchange reads differently. Go back to the beginning and think about what each side brought to this confrontation. Trump brought 6 social media posts written on impulse. Carney brought a 247-page economic impact assessment of every threat Trump could plausibly make, with pre-written rebuttals for each one. Trump brought 3 unvetted threats made on live television. Carney brought 3 surgical countermeasures that had been reviewed by economists, approved by cabinet, cleared by legal counsel, and wargamed for second-order effects. Trump brought his anger. Carney brought 5 allied nations with pre-approved statements waiting for a signal. Trump brought a phone. Carney brought a strategy. That asymmetry between impulse and preparation, between reaction and anticipation, between volume and precision, is not just the story of this particular day. It's the story of this entire trade conflict. And today, for the first time, that asymmetry was visible to the entire world in a single 12-hour window. There was no ambiguity, no spin that could obscure it, no narrative that could reframe it. One side was ready, the other side was angry. And the market, the allies, the senators, and the historians all saw the same thing. Let me put this in perspective. The banking threat that Trump made at 8 a.m., Carney's team had modeled the consequences of banking restrictions 3 weeks earlier. They knew that Canadian financial institutions are so deeply embedded in American markets that restrictions would cause more damage to American lending, mortgage processing, and commercial transactions than to Canadian banks. They had the $2.4 trillion figure prepared. They had the cross-border transaction volume prepared. They had the names of American industries that would be disrupted prepared. When Trump made the threat, Carney's team didn't need to research anything. They opened a folder. The energy import freeze threat. Carney's energy ministry had run the supply models months ago. They knew the 60% dependency figure. They knew the per-gallon price impact. They had contacted the 3 independent energy analysts and secured permission to cite their projections by name. When Trump threatened to freeze Canadian energy imports, Carney's team didn't scramble to find data. They pulled it off a shelf. The USMCA withdrawal threat. Carney's legal team had prepared a 14-page constitutional analysis of the withdrawal process before Trump ever mentioned it. They knew it required congressional involvement. They knew the 6-month notice period. They knew the automatic reversion clauses. They even had the specific article number 34.6 ready to cite on camera. Every single rebuttal was pre-researched, pre-verified, and pre-packaged. This level of preparation doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a leader takes the job seriously enough to anticipate what's coming and build the tools to respond before the crisis arrives. And it reveals something uncomfortable about the other side. If your threats can be pre-rebutted, it means your threats are predictable. And if your threats are predictable, it means you're not thinking, you're reacting. And a reactive leader in a strategic conflict is a leader who has already lost. They just don't know it yet. And then Warren Buffett delivered what may be the most devastating assessment of presidential competence in the entire trade conflict. Not the most dramatic, not the loudest, the most devastating. Because Buffett doesn't deal in drama, he deals in assessment. And his assessment of what he watched unfold today cut deeper than any political commentary could. Speaking at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholders event that evening, Buffett opened with a principle he's applied to every investment decision he's made in 7 decades. In 70 years of evaluating companies, he said, I've learned one thing that applies to every business, every investment, and every leader. Preparation is the single most reliable indicator of competence. When a CEO walks into an earnings call with answers for questions that haven't been asked yet, I'm confident. When a CEO walks in and improvises, I'm nervous. And I'm nervous for a reason. Because improvisation in high-stakes situations is not creativity. It's unpreparedness. And unpreparedness in business and in government always has a cost. The only question is how large the bill. He paused. Then he said the line that every financial outlet would lead with by morning. What I watched today was one leader improvise and another leader prepare. And the outcome was entirely predictable, because the outcome is always the same. Preparation wins. It wins in boardrooms, it wins in markets, and today it won in international relations. Buffett then walked through the exchange with the methodical precision of an investor evaluating management quality, the thing he spent his entire career doing better than anyone else alive. The president made 3 specific economic threats on live television this morning. None of them had been assessed by his economic team. None had been reviewed for legal feasibility. None had been modeled for market impact or unintended consequences. One of them, the USMCA withdrawal threat, isn't even within the president's unilateral authority. He threatened something he cannot legally do, and he did it on camera to the entire world without checking first. Canada's Prime Minister responded with a pre-built counterstrike that addressed each threat with specific, independently verified data, activated targeted economic measures within hours, and coordinated 5 allied nations to issue supporting statements within 90 minutes. That level of coordination takes weeks of preparation. It means Carney's team had identified this exact scenario, built the response, secured the allied commitments, and preloaded the economic actions all before this morning, all before Trump even woke up. One leader woke up angry and started posting. The other leader had been planning for this moment for weeks. The market read the difference instantly. One was priced as a risk, the other was priced as an asset. And risk, in my experience, is always more expensive than preparation. He wasn't finished. Buffett went on to explain what this exchange revealed about the market's deeper assessment. Markets are the most honest judges in the world. They don't have political affiliations. They don't have loyalty. They don't care about rhetoric or insults or social media posts. They assess competence and they price it. Today they assess 2 leaders, one who governs by impulse and one who governs by preparation, and they price them accordingly. The Canadian dollar strengthened. American agricultural futures spiked in the states being targeted. Energy stocks fell. Financial stocks weakened. The market didn't need pundits to tell it who won. The market knew by 2 o'clock. By close of trading, the numbers confirmed everything Buffett described. The Canadian dollar strengthened against the US dollar for the first time in weeks. American agricultural futures spiked sharply in all 6 states targeted by the potash restrictions, corn, soybeans, and wheat, all rising on fertilizer supply uncertainty. Energy stocks fell on the pipeline redirection news as refineries priced in medium-term supply risk. American financial stocks softened on the institutional capital outflow guidance. The S&P 500 closed down, with trade-sensitive sectors leading the decline across the board. After Carney's response landed, the White House went completely quiet. No follow-up posts, no press briefing, no escalation, no clarification of the morning's threats, no attempt to walk them back, just silence. Advisors were reportedly in full damage control mode throughout the afternoon, assessing which of Trump's morning threats were legally feasible, what the market implications would be if any were actually implemented, how to contain the agricultural fallout in 6 states simultaneously, and how to walk back specific commitments made on live television without appearing to retreat. The morning was loud, the afternoon was silent, and in diplomacy, silence after a provocation isn't strength. It's the sound of a team realizing their leader made promises they can't keep and commitments they can't honor. Republican senators from the 6 states targeted by Carney's potash restrictions were on the phone by mid-afternoon. Iowa's senators called for immediate dialogue to resolve agricultural supply disruptions. Nebraska's senator issued a statement about the critical importance of fertilizer supply security for American farmers. Ohio's senator requested a full briefing on the trade implications of this morning's developments, which is diplomatic language for what the hell just happened and why weren't we warned. The senator from Kansas was reportedly the most direct, telling a White House liaison, "My farmers can't plant without fertilizer. Fix this or I'm going public." Carney's targeting worked exactly as designed. Within hours of the counterstrike, Republican senators were calling the White House, not to support the trade war, not to back the president's morning threats, to demand that the White House fix the damage the call-out had caused. The potash restrictions didn't just threaten abstract trade statistics. They threatened real planting seasons, real crop yields, real livelihoods in real districts represented by real senators who have real re-election campaigns. Trump's unscripted provocation didn't just fail on the world stage. It created a domestic political crisis inside his own coalition that his own allies were demanding he resolve. Internationally, the read was immediate and devastating. Diplomats and foreign policy analysts worldwide noted the asymmetry in real time, the speed and sophistication of Canada's response versus the impulsiveness and incoherence of the American provocation. The exchange elevated Canada's standing in ways that years of traditional diplomacy couldn't have achieved. It diminished America's credibility in ways that will take years to repair. Every government in the world just watched a 12-hour case study in leadership. One leader operated on impulse, backed by nothing but volume. The other operated on preparation, backed by data, allies, and pre-built countermeasures. And the international community drew the obvious conclusion about whom to trust with serious, binding, long-term economic agreements. If you're the EU negotiating a trade framework, which leader do you want across the table? If you're Japan allocating investment capital, which country's commitments do you trust? The answers write themselves. And here's what Buffett said. This should keep every American voter up tonight. What concerns me most is not this exchange specifically, but what it reveals about how America is being governed. When the leader of the world's largest economy makes policy by social media post, when specific consequential economic threats are made on impulse, without review, without analysis, without coordination, the country's credibility as a serious negotiating partner is destroyed. Not just with Canada, with every country, with every investor, with every institution that needs to trust that American commitments are considered and reliable. He added, Carney's preparation didn't just win the day, it exposed the absence of preparation on the other side, and that exposure is visible to every government and every investor in the world. You can't unring that bell. Every nation now knows that American economic threats may be made on impulse by one person watching television, with no review, no analysis, and no institutional backing. That knowledge changes how every country on earth deals with the United States, and that change doesn't go away when the news cycle moves on. So here's the full picture of what happened in a single day. This morning, Donald Trump woke up, saw something on television that made him angry, and decided to call out an entire nation. He posted 6 times in 45 minutes. He made 3 specific economic threats on live television that his own team hadn't reviewed, his own economists hadn't modeled, and his own lawyers hadn't assessed for legal feasibility. He backed himself into a corner where following through would hurt America more than Canada, and backing down would make him look weak. His own National Economic Council director found out from a CNN push notification. By lunchtime, Mark Carney had dismantled every threat with independently verified data from 3 separate analytical firms. He'd activated surgical economic countermeasures targeting Trump's political base in 6 agricultural states during pre-planting season. He'd coordinated 5 allied nations to publicly criticize the United States and endorse Canada's position, all landing within 90 minutes. By close of trading, markets had declared a winner. By mid-afternoon, Republican senators from targeted states were calling the White House demanding damage control. By evening, Warren Buffett had delivered the verdict. One leader was priced as an asset, one as a risk. And by nightfall, every government on earth had recalibrated its assessment of American reliability. This exchange wasn't about tariffs or trade policy or even the U.S.-Canada relationship in isolation. It was a demonstration of something more fundamental. The difference between leading by impulse and leading by preparation. Trump's call-out was designed to project strength. Instead, it exposed vulnerability. The vulnerability of a leader who makes policy on television without consulting the people who have to implement it, without assessing consequences, without considering that the other side might already be positioned and waiting. Carney's counterstrike was designed to demonstrate exactly one thing, that Canada had anticipated this, prepared for this, and was better positioned for this confrontation than the country that started it. That demonstration succeeded completely. Not because Canada is bigger, not because Canada is stronger economically, but because one side treated governance like a strategic discipline and the other side treated it like a social media platform. The trade war has been framed as a contest of economic power. Today it was revealed as a contest of competence. And competence won. Buffett put it as simply as anyone could. Preparation is a signal. Impulse is a signal. Markets read both. Today the market read both and priced them accordingly. This morning, Donald Trump woke up angry, reached for his phone, and started a fight with a country that had been waiting for exactly that phone call. Waiting with data, waiting with countermeasures, waiting with 5 allied nations holding pre-approved statements, waiting with surgical economic actions calibrated to hit the exact constituencies that would cause maximum political pain. Impulse starts fights, preparation wins them. The next time Trump reaches for his phone at 7 a.m., the question isn't whether Carney will be ready. The question is whether Carney has already built the response for that one too. Based on today, the answer is yes.